Hey there, in this video we're going to go through some of the basic and more advanced tips, tricks and strategies that you can use to win in a game of Azul. Focus on the middle columns. So the first thing you're going to want to do when playing Azul is to focus on building columns, as this is where you'll score the most points. Generally speaking, it's best to focus on one of the three middle columns, as this gives you the most options to place tiles on either side of these columns to get bonus points each time you're placing tiles. Most of your points will come from placing tiles adjacent to other tiles, so focusing on this location offers you the most flexibility. Try to always place beside existing tiles. The majority of your points will come throughout the game from adjacency points rather than actually completing rows, columns, or colours. That means, rather than placing tiles individually around the board, you should always be attempting to place them beside other tiles to get scoring bonuses. Force the game end if you can. Keep an eye on your score versus your opponent's, and if you're ahead by enough points, it's sometimes worth forcing the game to end by completing a row. Check if your opponents will be able to get any bonus point actions like completing a column or colour before the end of the round before you do this, and in particular, try to leave it until close to the last turn so you can take them by surprise. Leave tiles until later. If there's some tiles you want to get but you know that your opponents can't or won't use them, you can just leave them until later. Don't feel the need to take them immediately, but instead take tiles that your opponent needs, if they suit your board spaces, or other more important tiles that you still want. Force your opponent to lose points by taking tiles. When you start to get down to the last one or two factories in a round, you might notice that there's a lot of one single colour. If you're careful about it, you can force your opponent to take those tiles to lose points by counting out the potential turns that they and you will most likely take. This works particularly well if you're playing against someone who's not an advanced player, as they're not expecting it. For example, in this scenario, if I take one black tile, my opponent will be forced to take the 3 black, I will take the 3 yellow, and they'll be forced to take 7 blue tiles, resulting in my opponent losing minus 14 points. Losing 1 or 2 points is sometimes better than blocking up your row for later. When you get down to the last few turns of a round, it's often better just to take a single minus 1 point by adding a tile to your factory floor, instead of placing it on the board and limiting your choices in the next 1 or potentially 2 rounds. For example, in this scenario, if I just take the yellow and place it on my factory floor, it's only 1 negative point. But if I was to place it on my bottom row, it will block up this row for 1 or potentially 2 rounds and will probably not score me any adjacency bonuses when completed. Stop your opponent from completing rows. If it makes sense to do it, you should take tiles that you know your opponent needs to complete a row, but generally only if it makes sense for your board. The longer they have a row uncompleted for, the less potential points they can score overall. One row that's uncompleted for 1 or even 2 rounds can really limit their options and their points. In this scenario, I could take the 1 single red tile, but by taking the 2 red tiles, I'll still complete my red space, get 1 negative point, but block my opponent's red row for another round, limiting their potential scoring from that area. Always take the first player token. You should always try to take the first player advantage token unless there's a very good reason not to. For example, in this scenario, it's probably beneficial for me to take the green token, as that's going to block my opponent's row for the next round. So those are some of the more basic tips. Now let's look at the more advanced ones. Base initial tile choice on the placement options. Look at the tiles available at the beginning of the round and base your first tile choice off those. For example, if starting the game, choose the tiles based on what you think you'll be able to fill in that round, hopefully within the middle columns. If I was the first player in this match, I would have chosen the 3 yellows and placed them in the middle row. In this match, my opponent has taken the 3 yellows as their first choice, meaning that it's pretty unlikely I'm going to be able to get more than 2 or maybe 3 yellow tiles for the rest of the game. Looking at the number of other tiles that are available, there's just enough blue tiles that I should be able to get 3, so I should probably choose 2 yellow tiles in the middle column as my first choice, then 3 blues, knowing that I'll probably get some blues, maybe a red, and maybe a black. Planning your tile choice ahead like this becomes a lot more difficult in games with more than 2 players. Try not to work the same column at the same time as your opponent. If your opponent's trying to complete the same column as you early in the game, it's sometimes worth changing to another column so you're not vying for the same tiles at the same time. Ideally, you don't want to be aiming for the exact same columns as your opponents, as you'll be competing for the same tiles each round. Don't give your opponent extra tiles for free. If taking tiles from a factory will give your opponent a larger set of tiles in one colour to grab at once, then try not to take tiles from that factory, but if possible, choose from another one instead, or just choose different coloured tiles. Use the first player token strategically. Once you have the first player token, ideally you'll want to try and retain it throughout the game. You do this by either taking tiles that not only benefit your board but also disrupt your opponent's plans, or by only offering them the option of getting a single tile they don't want or need if they're going to take the first player token. For example, in this match, if I had have taken a single black and let the 2 blues and yellow go into the center, my opponent would have taken the 2 blues and first player token. Instead, by taking 2 reds, it forces them to choose a yellow or green tile in order to get the first player token, both of which are not beneficial or optimal for their board. Balance your colors. Try to balance your colors and not focus too much on one single color. By completing all of one color early in the game, it can limit your options later, and you could potentially get stung with many negative points towards the end of the game. For example, if I completed all my blues on the board early in the game, from that point onwards I wouldn't be able to take any blue tiles, and my opponent could make me take a lot of negative points by forcing me to take blue tiles. Prioritize tiles that both you and your opponent need. When starting a round, prioritize getting tiles that both you and your opponent need. For tiles that only you need, you can easily wait until later to take them, but taking tiles that both of you will need will disrupt your opponent's plan. For example, in this situation, my opponent could really do with 3 green tiles. I'll take those, and then try stop them from completing the row of red by taking any additional reds that I can. Tile counting. There are 100 tiles in the Azul bag, 20 of each color. If you're getting towards the end of the game and wondering what your chances are of completing a color in the next round or two, you can figure this out by subtracting the number of tiles that are already in play on player boards from the number that are available in the bag. For example, in this situation, if I used all 3 black tiles to complete this tile on my board, there would be 1 black tile left on my board and 2 go back into the bag. As there would be 6 black tiles already in use on the board, there's only 14 left in the bag in total, as there's only 20 of each color in Azul. So there's still 70% of the blacks potentially available in future rounds. Take negative points on round 1 to disrupt your opponent. This strategy is sometimes beneficial if it'll mess with your opponent's plans. On the first round of the game, you usually don't score many points, generally 0 to 5, 6 at most, but on average 2 or 3. Sometimes it's worth getting a lot of negative points on the first round to stop your opponent completing anything, forcing them into more limited options in the next round, and potentially being able to force them into taking lots of negative points. Don't forget, 0 is the lowest your score can go, so taking lots of negative points before you have any points won't do anything to your score. Mind games and bluffing. This strategy is more beneficial while playing with real people rather than playing online. Use psychological tactics to your advantage, and deliberately leave tiles on the floor line or pattern lines that may tempt your opponents into making suboptimal moves. Create the illusion of scarcity by taking tiles that you don't necessarily need, forcing opponents to rethink their strategies or take tiles that they don't want. Pick up tiles to make it look like you want them, put them back down and choose something else. Your opponent may think you're planning to take them on the next turn and try swiping them instead, but maybe that's your plan all along. Thanks for checking out the video. If you have any tips, tricks or strategies, let me know in the comments.